Life doesn't ask if you're ready. It throws challenges and expects you to get through them. Hi, I'm Sharon Landon, and welcome back to this episode of Old Asian Lady. Today's guest is my brother, Tom Landon. In part one of our conversation, we explore what it means to grow up feeling like an outsider, from frequent moves as a military family to challenges with bullying to navigating ADHD, and how moving to Hawaii gave him a clean slate, new confidence, and a chance to rewrite his story until his next life challenge crops up. This episode is about the power of starting over and the strength it takes to keep moving forward. Just a quick reminder, if you like our stories, please like, share, and subscribe. We really appreciate your support.
Work up at one of the larger hospitals here in Pittsburgh. I take care of the nurses' schedules and the inpatient nurses' schedules and track their in and out times, take care of their holidays and their vacation time and things like that.
Okay.
We've been here since 1991.
For people in the audience that don't know, you're one of my brothers, and we moved a lot when we were younger. And what were your thoughts about all the moves that we made?
Well, I think the hardest one was from Japan to Maryland, because the whole 8 years that we were there, I was always kind of an outsider, you know.
I didn't know that. Why did you feel that?
We fit in Japan because we were living on a military base. We were,
Okay.
and so we were around a bunch of people that were moving in and out, and so they were always there was always so there was always that movement and things like that. But when we moved to Maryland, we moved into a neighborhood where the people had lived there their whole lives, and so I always felt like we were kind of like outsiders.
What were some of the things that you felt that made you feel like you didn't fit in? You were in elementary school when we moved to Maryland.
Yes. I mean, there were times when I fit in where I belonged, but it just was, it was just the general sense was that I kind of felt like I was not part of the crowd.
I'm not sure I felt the I didn't belong kind of thing that I'm sensing that you're talking about. I felt like because I'm Asian and there were not any, Asians, not many in where we were living and stuff. So I kind of a little bit felt out of place in that way. Not necessarily, it's really weird because in terms of identity, I guess I always thought that I was a Caucasian, or I always acted like a Caucasian and not identifying with really being Asian kind of thing. It's interesting to hear that you felt that because you were Caucasian and we were around all these Caucasians. Was it because you didn't necessarily go to join stuff like sports? Mom and dad wouldn't let you guys play football, right?
Right. It
Yeah.
wasn't so much that. I think, well, I had my own issues besides. Remember, I was a lot more hyperactive then. I was a lot, I don't know how you would say what you'd say. I mean, hyperactive was probably the best thing. I was a little more out of control, I think, than I am now. And I think that kind of helped kind of alienate me from the people there. And by the time 10th grade rolled around, of course, I'd calmed down a lot. But for me, the change from moving from Maryland to Hawaii completely changed everything for me. I assimilated so much better when we moved to Hawaii. And I was more involved in activities in high school in Hawaii.
Okay, we'll get to that part. But then I was thinking, what is that term that you said hyperactivity? Is there a term for that? I
Well,
mean,
it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
okay,
That
so
was one of the reasons. Yeah, I mean, it was like there's a lot more frenetic. I don't know how you would go about that. Just more moving around a lot more, like aimless activity, aimless physical activity, I guess.
no, I don't know because aimless activity. What are you talking about? Wandering around the streets, or you
No,
know?
no, 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 no. Just, I mean, just like I don't want to say my mind was racing or anything like that. It was just there was a lot more anxiety, I think, involved in it. And I think by the time I got to 15, I had calmed down a lot, and so it wasn't as much of it. A lot of that stuff maybe was internal, but I just
Mhm.
felt like there was a lot of that going on.
Okay. Were you bullied in school? Because a lot of times
Oh
when
yeah,
oh, you were.
yeah.
Oh, was that in elementary school?
Um, no, more in high school, more in middle school and high school. There wasn't anything really physical. I mean, there was one or
Mhm.
two fight. I got into one or two fights, but
Mhm.
nothing too physical. But just that kind of stuff. And I think that once you pick a victim, when bullies pick a victim, then it just becomes you just become an eternal victim. When we were in Maryland, they were smoking pot on the bus, and I reported it, and of
Mhm.
course they found out that I reported it. So that was a
Oh.
lot of it. That was a lot of it right there. Um, but that was the amazing thing about mom and dad. Um, when they found out about it, um, they went, they took me to those kids' houses and spoke to their parents right there. And
Mhm.
it was just like the I mean, it wasn't like they went there to physically threaten them or anything like that. They're just like, hey, your kid is bullying my son and he needs to stop. And both of the parents in both of those cases, in one of the cases, the dad was a police officer.
Oh.
But yeah, but in both of those cases, the parents made it a point of telling the kids they need to leave me alone. But that's not to say that I still didn't get a lot of singling out and teasing from that group of people. Bullying is not just physical. There's a lot of teasing and there's a
Yeah.
lot of singling out. You become the odd man. When you become the odd man out, then you tend to stay the odd man out. You can't
Mhm.
really ever move back in. So that's one of the reasons that for me, the move to Hawaii was a godsend.
What was one of the worst bullying incidents that you've had to deal with?
Well, in the case of the one, two kids got on the bus on the way home one day. This is after the reporting and everything, and they said, we're going to get off the bus with you, and we're going to beat you up." And instead of, I didn't get off the bus at the normal stop. Then I got off at the elementary school, and I went in there and told them what was happening, and was able to call dad at work from there. And so he went home. He came home early, and the principal from the elementary school actually drove me home that day. And they were waiting out in front of the house.
Oh wow.
And yeah, when dad got there, and there wasn't any confrontation when they saw him, they just left. But that was the thing that sparked, like I said, that sparked the confrontation between mom and dad and their parents.
Mhm.
Um, but like the physical stuff stopped for that. But then like I said, the group that group of kids, and their friends at that time, they wouldn't do anything physical, but they were just like, "Oh, you're a narc," that kind of stuff.
Oh.
And they, they'd see me places and they'd say that, and it just, but I mean, I had friends in high school. There were people that I was comfortable around and could, laugh and joke with. But there was, just because of that, there was a lot of that going on.
Okay. Were they? Because there's certain groups that cliques that are in high school and stuff.
Right.
Were they the jocks and stuff, or were they just?
No, they were the heads.
Also, they were the heads, and they still.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so interesting. But because in high school or even in junior high school, I thought you were getting pretty tall there.
Yeah, I was. By the time I was in ninth grade, I started ninth grade at 6 foot. By the time we left Maryland, I was 6'3" or 6'4". I think 6'3", but it was still, so I was continuing to grow the whole time. But for some people, that doesn't matter how big you are or anything like that. It just, and sometimes picking a fight with a much bigger guy, only is a win-win, because if you beat him up, you beat up a big guy. But if he beats you up, oh, he was a big guy. It was, that was easy for him,
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so I avoided that kind of stuff. But it's not to say
Okay.
you wouldn't have one or two fights or anything like that, because that happened. But
And did you come out the winner kind where people would like leave you alone then after that when in your fights, or you were totally
the
beaten?
well, usually, let's see. There was one in elementary school where a kid was following me around. He said he was going to beat me up, and I finally got cornered, and I beat the living crap out of him. And before the teachers could intervene, and I think it mortified him. I think he had a really rough time with that. But it just everything kind of calmed down after that. There was one in 10th grade where, again, the guy was razzing me, and it was about the narking thing, but that was like almost 2 years in the past. But he was, and I backhanded him, because I was just like furious at that point. I backhanded him, and before we actually got into a physical fight, the teacher broke it up, and he tried to get into a fight with me later about it. But by that time, I'd calmed down. I was like, I'm not going to fight with you. And he punched me in the chest. And because I think it finally ensued to the point where the teacher had to get the administration involved. And so I actually got suspended for fighting that time. That was the only time I ever got suspended. And I was suspended for a day for that. So.
Okay. See, this is interesting. I never knew any of this stuff. I guess we were in my own high school, whatever life. But in terms of your AD, because it used to be called, I think it used to be called ADHD, but now now it's called ADD?
It depends upon whether you have the hyperactivity or not.
Okay.
ADD is attention deficit disorder. ADHD is attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity.
Okay, so at that time, I mean, you knew that you had it. Were you taking medication? I mean, did you know that was your situation?
Yes, I knew that.
Okay, and you cognitively understood all the things that came with that.
Well, I think that's hard to say for a kid. You just know that you're different.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things, like now they're saying, well, we're over diagnosing. For a long time it was like in vogue, I guess you could say. I have and so people were over medicating. They were that was in vogue. Now I think Asperger's syndrome is, I want to say, the vogue diagnosis. So if you want to say that.
Okay, yeah, I guess I was just wondering that then, as a person who has that, the main thing was that you just felt like you just didn't belong.
Nobody else in the class that is on medication. Nobody else in the class that has this diagnosis, that kind of stuff. And so, you kind of feel alienated because of that too.
Yeah. So you said then that everything changed for you when we moved to Hawaii.
Right.
And partly it was because we moved to a military base again.
Yeah.
Was that the main reason? Because you went to a local high school.
All the high schools were civilian high schools in
Oh, yeah.
Hawaii. You know,
That's true.
if we had lived at Pearl Harbor, we would have gone to Radford High School.
Mm-hmm.
But where we were stationed, I went to Mililani High School instead. So,
What was it about Hawaii then that you felt that everything changed?
well, it was a clean slate. You know, it was like a chance to start all over again. It didn't have a history. Didn't so it was a chance to start all over again and be like I said, I was able to join sports. I made friends that were made. Ironically, both of my best friends there, both of their dads were military or former or retired military. But I had a lot of we were exposed to a different culture there completely. So
Yeah. So I wonder if that's the thing too, is that by then you said you had already calmed down. And also, I mean, being 6'3", you were in what, wrestling? Did you ever end up doing any kind of football stuff at all?
no football. I was in wrestling and I did judo.
Oh, and judo also.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. Nobody, yeah, nobody would dare to.
Well, I actually it's kind of funny because of course then I was the only white guy on the on the judo team, and
Okay.
next tallest guy came to about mid chest on me, but
Who'd you fight with it?
it was weight classes. We
Okay.
went by weight classes, so I was fighting guys that were actually bigger than me as far as the
Ah.
weight was concerned, but they weren't necessarily nearly as tall as I was.
All right. So in both judo and wrestling, there were different weight classes that you
Right.
worked with. And how how did you do? Because by then I had already moved out of the house. So, I mean, did the team do
Well,
good? Did you win?
I did pretty well in both of them. I think my second year more than my junior year. My senior year, I placed in the state in wrestling in the unlimited class.
Okay.
I was like right at 200 pounds. 200 pounds was the limit. Like my junior year, I was in the 200-pound weight class, and in the senior year, I was in the unlimited weight class. But I was like right around 200, 205 pounds at that point. So I was lighter than some of the guys because they had a guy that was, they had people, the Samoans and some of the big, real big guys. They were about 280 pounds, and
Oh.
I was still beating them. And
Ah.
like I said, I placed in the state. And in judo, I was ranked number 2 in the unlimited division in high school.
Okay.
So, but I didn't get to go to the state finals because of my grades. But
Oh.
yeah,
Well.
I was never really a scholar, but so anyway, but I like they told me I ranked second in the state as far as rankings are concerned. I didn't go to any tournaments or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I remember when I was going to school and I grades were always a big thing with mom and dad. So by
Yeah.
the time you guys came around, it wasn't as important to them. It was just
No, it's not that. It was just that I I maintained my grades for long enough to be able to compete in the sports, and then I just kind of slacked off after that.
okay.
They weren't happy with it, but that's the way it went.
Okay, so you actually went from being bullied to, I mean, were you jock status in Hawaii, but popular
Um,
crowd
it's
in Hawaii?
it's it's kind of hard to explain because Hawaii was such a smaller community. And it's so funny because I would go places. I would, like I'd go to the mall or something like that, and total strangers would walk up to me and say, "Hey, I saw you at this wrestling tournament, or I saw you at this," because they had, again, I don't know whether it was just the being, the big white guy or whatever, but that was just it. And even after we moved to California, I had a friend who had Samoan friends, and I was at the mall one day, and I saw him there, and he's like, "Hey, I got some of my friends from Samoa here." And I went over there, and one of the guys right from the crowd, he goes, "I remember you." He was like, "Yeah." I was like, total strangers knew who I was. It was weird.
Wow. So in then how did you I guess having that kind of a big shift, and all it is a matter of, well, a matter of location actually, but also, maybe growing up in things, um in terms of your self-confidence, you know that must have just gave you a super big boost in a
It
lot of
did.
ways.
It did. Yeah. I mean, it made me a lot more self-confident, and it made me have a better, I guess, I don't know, like better self-image.
You never experienced any kind of um racial bias or that kind of stuff, um
Oh yeah, I
because
did.
you were popular.
No, it's not that, because I did. There was still some of that.
Oh, okay.
But it was just it was like I think I was just with the self-confidence, it was a little, it was a little easier to deal with, I think. They had a tradition there. I don't know if they still do it. Like at the end of the school year, they had a day they called Kill Howley Day.
Oh.
And yeah, it wasn't very pleasant, but like they didn't mess with me, but they tried to mess around with Jonathan, and
Mm-hmm.
I stepped in, and I was
Mm-hmm.
able to take some off. But you know, but it was like, and it wasn't, I think I was like squaring off with them when an administrator showed up, and they kind of disappeared, but it was still, like, um, but I felt more self-confidence in doing things like that.
Right.
But and
Oh.
again, a lot of my friends were Howleys, they were white. I mean,
Oh.
I had local friends, but a lot of the people that I really hung out with were white. And because we went to military chapel, that's where, I hung out with a lot of sailors, and things like that from chapel. So
Okay. That just sounds weird that in high school you're like hanging around with sailors, because it seems like I would picture it as in, when you hear about sailors, it sometimes gives the image of, you know drinking and all of that kind of stuff. I think it's a
no, none of
stereotype.
that. Yeah. No, no, not none of that. But and again, remember this was from church, so
Oh yeah. That's right. So then you graduated from Mililani, and then dad he retired, right? And you guys.
well, um, he retired the year after I graduated, but they stayed there another year so that Jonathan could graduate from Mililani.
Okay.
And we moved off base. So I spent 2 years in high school there, and then I spent 2 years at junior college.
Oh, what is the biggest impressions then, that you had then of Hawaii?
Um, well, I mean, I liked it, and I tell people it's a great place to be from. But I found that you can never go back to where you've been. You know what I mean? You can never go. I don't- you, to say you can never go home again.
Hmm.
I mean, because Hawaii had changed so much. When we went back to Elk Grove to visit mom, it had changed so much.
Yeah.
Or visit mom and dad. It was so different from what it was like when we lived there. Um, it just, that those things are all very different now, so that you can never go back to them.
When we're talking about not being able to go back, yeah, it's a lot of things that when you're younger and you had this image of something, for example, like Disneyland or something. It's a small world, whatever. And I went back as an adult, and it was like, this is what I love so much at Disneyland. Yeah, it was just really weird. But for like I said, as Asians, we didn't bring this up before, but definitely because we were adopted, and all the time growing up, what was your thinking about having, or did you have any thoughts about having an Asian brother and sister in your
It's
family?
kind of funny. Because I've always been bigger than you guys. Even when we were little kids, I was
Yeah.
always bigger than you guys. Um, but I always like when I tell my friends about the fact that I had a Chinese brother and sister. I say, well, you know what? I've always considered them my brother and sister. They just had better tans than me. That was about it. I was like, they were small. They were smaller than me, and they always had better tans. But that was it.
So what was it like then once you moved back to California? Because then you guys weren't on the military base anymore. I mean, you're older, of course, but
Mhm.
did that have any impact on your life?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain. Because we moved into a rural neighborhood. We moved into a rural area. When we moved into Elk Grove, it was far enough away from Sacramento um, that it was a rural area, and it was only like 5,000 people when we moved there,
Mm.
and now it's its own city. Elk Grove it's huge now.
Mm-hmm.
My first job that I had for a long time, I worked at the gas station there. And it was one of those things where I worked there for years, even after I left, I would go back and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll take you back." So I mean, I worked this, it was one of those things where I bounced from two or three jobs, and it was just, if it was more convenient to work at one of them, I'd work there, and. So if that makes sense.
You fit in over there. Well,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, yeah, because, I fit in there more. Working at the gas station was of a fit for me because it was the kind of thing I like cars. So to be
mhm.
around cars was a lot of fun. And I got to, and people came in and I talked to a lot of people. It was, again, it was one of those things where everybody knew me in Elk Grove
Yeah, yeah,
because I worked at a place that was centrally located.
right. Okay, so you said you went to SAC. I mean,
California State
Sacramento
University.
University, and I mean, was there what did you study there?
I majored in psychology.
Psychology. And was that because you had your interest in it? That was something that you were thinking about your career wise, or
I wanted to work in child psych. I did that. I worked at the group home, a group home in Stockton for a long time. The whole time that I was there, from 1985 until 1991 when we left.
okay.
I worked there. I worked at the group home, and I worked at the school that was affiliated with it. The last year or so, that's what I did. Um, but I also, like I said, it would bounce back and forth between the gas station and working there. I also worked I worked at a daycare center in southern and South Sacramento for a year too. So
Well,
yeah,
so you actually hadn't really thought about doing military because dad was in military, Jonathan went in military. You
I'm
decided to go the other way.
when I was 10, I stepped on a nail when we were in Idaho.
Oh,
We were visiting in Idaho. I stepped on a rusty nail and it gave me an infection in one of the bones in my feet. And that's what pretty much kept me out of the military. Because I did go in I took the physical, and they were like, everything else is fine, but because if that bone infection had been in anywhere else in my body, they would have been fine with me. But because it was in my foot, I couldn't, like they said, well, you can't march. Well, I was pretty much convinced that I wouldn't be marching if I was in the military, but I'd be behind a desk somewhere.
Yeah.
They just kept me out of the military.
Okay. That so when you had the nail thing, I mean, was it? I mean, I remember the incident, but
Yeah.
was it sore this your whole life, or I mean,
Well, what happened was it immediately after I stepped on the nail, it healed up. It wasn't a problem, but then the bone started swelling. The bone in my foot started swelling, and it became painful to walk on. But it would exacerbate. It would be fine for years, and then all of a sudden it would blow up, and my foot would swell, and I couldn't walk on it, and for like 2 or 3 days. Then it would go back down to be normal and be fine again.
oh, interesting. That's not what they call a bone spur, is it?
No. I have bone spurs too, but that's just because I don't get up and move around enough. But
Oh,
the the bone infection is there was actually an infection inside the bone, the marrow and what have you inside the bone, and it actually caused the bone to swell. I mean, when you look at the X-rays of it, you can really see the difference.
this is not the only accident you had when you were younger.
Oh no, I was
Didn't
pretty accident prone as a kid.
Yeah, you got shot in the eye or something like that.
I got that. I had a cataract in my eye. I had a scar basically on the lens for years, but a couple years ago I had cataract surgery, so they removed the lenses. I have I mean, whatever. I have lenses. I have different lenses now, so I don't
Okay.
need glasses, but I need glasses to read. But
Mhm.
so we have reading glass. I have reading glasses all over the house now.
Yeah, me too.
They're everywhere. Yeah, but uh, that part of it went away. I still have in that eye because of the trauma. I have what they call optic hypertension, which will eventually turn into glaucoma in the one eye. So
Okay. So that has nothing to do with the lenses being changed or anything.
no, what they did when they took out the natural lenses that has a cataract, they put in what they called torics lenses, and I don't hope I didn't mangle that, but they allow me to see normally for the most part. It's not 100%, um,
Hmm.
but it's decent enough that I don't need glasses. So
Okay. Um, I guess I was just thinking too is that with the bone infection that you have from the nail and maybe this thing with the eye, because you ended up having a really big health crisis. You had a leukemia. Um, and did the doctors ever say anything about those infections or whatever like that leading up to it or causing that?
no, they said the only thing that I had in my life that was a risk factor was probably actually working at the gas station,
Wow.
being exposed to petroleum products, like gasoline and some of the other things that are involved with cars, dirty oil, what have you. Though that's the kind of stuff that actually that's the one risk factor that I had. So
Oh, I mean, is that? I'm just curious if you ever checked if that was a statistics in terms of people having leukemia, if they, worked in gas stations or around gas and cars all the time.
well, that was what that was what my doctor said. He said, "Look,"
Mhm.
he said, he said, "We've looked through everything that your habits. Uh, I I didn't drink to excess or any. I didn't drink, to alcohol to excess. I never smoked or anything like that. The only one thing was had a lot of exposure to petroleum products.
Mm-hmm.
So
So when did you find out that you had leukemia?
um, it was in 1996. We were actually in the process of buying the house that we're in, and I just felt like I was getting a cold a lot, or getting like bronchitis, or things. I was coughing all the time. I was losing weight real rapidly. I didn't even all put it all together to be anything too serious. I lost like 40 pounds over like 3 months.
Wow.
And it really didn't occur to me that was anything that serious. Of course, all my coworkers going, man, Tom, you need to go to the doctor. But I was like, just put it off because we were in the process of buying the house. And I was like, that was more serious than anything. One of the more troubling symptoms that I had, though, was that if I was sitting down, I would get coughing fits as part of one of my symptoms. But if I was sitting down when I was coughed, sometimes I would just black out. So like I'd wake up on the floor. I'd be coughing, and the next thing I knew, I'd be on the floor.
I mean,
So
because the coughing was so heavy, or it just
I just lost all my oxygen. So it's
oh,
starved of oxygen, so I pass out.
okay. And then, well, at that time, then I guess you had to go to the hospital.
Well, like I said, I just ignored it. Actually, it was scary because one time when that happened, um, I was driving between the two houses, between our old residence and this house, and I had one of those coughing fits when I was driving, and when I woke up, I was like 100 yards down the road. Yeah, and
In the car still.
yes, yes, and I always
Oh wow.
it was a miracle. I mean, I always attribute it to God. It's a miracle
Yeah, I
because
think the guardian angel was around you.
yeah, oh yeah, because the car that I was driving was one of those, like in the early 90s. They were all GM put out a bunch of cars that had plastic bodies, and this one had a plastic body. And when I got out of the car, when I got to where I was needed to go, and I looked at the car, there was damage on the side of it. What had happened was that I had hit the guardrail, you know, and I just followed the guardrail around like a train on a track, and the car didn't go any further than, I mean, it stayed on the road. Basically, it didn't go run into the woods or anything like that. I didn't hit anybody or anything like that. And the car wasn't too damaged that it wasn't drivable. Was impaired, so I was able to drive it. But it just was like that freaked me out. But even then, I didn't. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't go to the doctor or anything.
Well, so I mean, was Byrne telling you that your wife telling you
Yeah.
you got to go, or she was also tied into this buying the house process?
We were just like, what was for me, what it was I was like, once I get into the house, then I'll take some time off and just be sick. And I thought it was just, like the cold or like bronchitis, and I'll get over it and it will be fine. And I also had planned to get some elective surgery done at that time. I had saved up my sick time, and I had one of the surgeries didn't even require any blood work. So it was that minor. And the other one was like, she said, well, we don't really need blood work, but we're going to do it as a precaution. She did it. And when they did the blood work, that's when they flagged leukemia.
Okay, so that was what was the period of time between when you first didn't know it was kind of the coughing thing to that period?
It was probably March or April, and I ended up in the hospital in May, in like early May.
Oh, so it wasn't even really that long of period that you had all
No.
these symptoms and
Yeah.
okay. Okay. And then when you found out that you had leukemia, what was going on in your mind, or what were you
Well, what happened was is I went in for one blood test, and my doctor called me, my PCP called me, and he said, I need you to come in for a second blood test. He said, we're not really sure. We want to be absolutely sure that there's something, what's going on. And he told me at that time, well, we think you have mono. So
What?
we
Mono?
think you have mononucleosis.
Oh.
Yeah. So I said, okay. So I went. So what happened was I was supposed to work an afternoon. It was Friday. It was a Friday. I was supposed to work an afternoon shift at the hospital that day. So I went in first thing in the morning and I got the blood test from him and I went home. And of course, we had just moved into the new house. And so we were doing a lot of remodeling. And so of course, I was sick this whole time. I really didn't feel good. I was coughing all the time and I was losing weight. But here I am carrying 5-pound buckets of plaster down from the third floor to the porch, so because we were doing demolition and we're not, that's not light. But I did that all morning. And then as I was getting ready for work, my doctor called me. He says, well, he says, you can't go to work. He says, I want you to go to the emergency room and sign yourself in. And I said, really? And so he said, yeah. And so I went to the hospital. When I went to, and that's where I worked, was at that hospital. And when I went there, there were people in the area, at the desk. And when I walked in and I said who I was, they said, oh, we've been waiting for you. We didn't even know if you were going to show up. And they told me, don't check in here. We want you to go straight up to this floor and let them know that you're here. And I did. They immediately put me in a bed. They were like, this is Friday afternoon. We're so sorry. The doctors are all gone already. But that people will be in to talk to you about this, and we're gonna work on your diagnosis. Nobody had said anything about it being leukemia yet.
Oh.
Okay. Nobody had said anything about that. And so Bern went home to get the kids to say goodbye to me because it was Friday afternoon. I was going to be in the hospital at least for the weekend. And so she brought the kids back and they were in bed. It was a 2-bed room and they were on the other bed that was unoccupied, and they were playing with the controls. You could see that, hear them making the bed go up and down and all this stuff. And they had their TV on. They were watching Ren and Stimpy, the TV cartoon. So I mean, this is all very surreal, but this is what it was like. And then Bern and I were talking. We were complaining about the fact that I was going to be in the hospital for the weekend. And the nurse came in, and she had an IV bag with her. And Bern was like, "What's that for?" And she said, "Well, this is so we can hook up for IV to do chemo." And Bern said, "Chemo?" And she said, "Oh," she said, the nurse was like, she just got this look on her face. She's like, "Nobody said anything to you, did they?" And she closed the door. She says, "Really, I can't say this officially, but you're in here because we're working on a diagnosis of leukemia." What happened was, it looked like a ton of bricks hit Bern. I mean, I could tell. I looked at her and there was just a lot of shock. Her recollection is that she doesn't remember taking the kids, getting them into the car, and she doesn't remember anything until she was about a mile or two from the hospital. For me, I was dealing with the fact that they were going to be ruling out whether or not I had cancer. I spent the whole weekend. I'd never been in the hospital overnight before that. I'd never had any kind of surgery before, other than having my wisdom teeth out. I'd never had any kind of surgery where they knocked you out before. And I had a lot of that after that. And I had never, it was just like a whole list of things that I'd never, all of a sudden were happening to me. And I spent 3 or 4 weeks in the hospital that time. And, Bern would come in and visit me. I don't remember the kids ever coming in to see me when I was in there. it was just very traumatic. And of course, we just bought the house. We weren't even living in the whole house. The house was broken up into apartments when we bought it. So we had tenants living in some parts of the house.
Oh.
So yeah, so we were only living in a part of the house, and and Bern wasn't working at that time. I was the only one working.
Mm-hmm.
So, but these are things that we dealt with, and that we were able to get through. And again, I think it was the Lord. I think God was in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, it was amazing what we went through with that.
What was like the total amount of time then that you said you were in the hospital for 3 to 4 weeks,
Right.
and then after that it was done, or you went back home?
Oh no, I was on chemo for another 2 weeks. Another 2 years.
Years, okay.
I was on chemotherapy for another 2 years. I was in and out of the hospital because leukemia is basically you're immunosuppressed. You don't have any kind of you're not fighting any infection. So I was if I spiked a fever, I was in the hospital. So I'd be in the hospital overnight. I would go. I can remember one time, and it would be even when I was an outpatient, I'd be coming into the hospital for chemotherapy. I started later. I was going to the doctor's office itself for chemotherapy, and we actually had a routine. Even after I went back to work, I was off work for 4 months. When I was finally healthy enough to go to work, I still wasn't physically strong enough to do a lot of things. I had difficulty doing common everyday tasks. At one point, somebody asked me to open a bottle of rubbing alcohol. I couldn't do it. I couldn't open a bottle of rubbing alcohol. I had to have somebody else help me with it. I could, you spend a lot of time wearing gloves in hospitals. I couldn't put gloves on by myself. I wasn't strong enough to do it. But people would help me do that kind of stuff. But it was just, we just got through it,
Yeah, I think getting through it is, I guess, what a lot of people have to do in terms of when there's something like this that happens in their life.